You're listening to What It's Like with Luz, a podcast highlighting ordinary people doing extraordinary things. I'm your host, Lucy Norris, and on today's episode, I'm sitting down with a Special Forces soldier and record-setting professional obstacle course racer. Interested in the outdoors from his early days in the Scouts, this week's guest has always been attracted to the idea of the military. Thinking about preparing for the course by putting his body through a variety of endurance sports, he could have never imagined he was actually readying himself for a career as a professional athlete. During his time as a soldier, he took part in the exchange program with Under Armour and ended up competing in his very first Tough Mudder, a race the brand was sponsoring. Finishing in 13th place, he realised he had a hidden talent for obstacle course racing and decided to get to work researching the sport and its opportunities. Now racing professionally with Conquer the Gauntlet, here's what it's like to be Evan Perperis. Welcome, Evan. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me today. I think if we start at the very beginning, always a good place to start. If you could share with me a bit about what you wanted to be initially when you were growing up and how you found the US military.
Yeah, so I'd say I had a pretty normal childhood. I was kind of a nerdy kid, so Star Wars, video games, Green Lantern, comic books, all that stuff. And going through high school, I did a little bit of sports, but I wasn't very good at really anything. So I spent most of my time doing Boy Scouts, and I spent most of my time in like drama club and musicals. So not really the athletic stuff.
Yeah.
Through Boy Scouts, that kind of instilled in me personal values, and then a lot of the older boys ended up going into the military, and that kind of sparked an interest there. And I kind of viewed, the Army as like advanced Boy Scouts, but with bigger guns. So.
Yeah. And what was it like when you first entered it? Was it harder than you expected? Exactly what you expected? What was that experience like?
So I entered through a program called RTC. So basically I went to a normal undergraduate college for 4 years, and essentially one of your classes is like Army class. So actually I was expecting it to be a little bit tougher than it was, and it was very welcoming. So it was actually easier than I was at first, those first 4 years while I was still in college, and I technically wasn't like in the Army.
Mm-hmm.
But then once you got in, then I don't know if it was harder than I expected it to be, but it was challenging, right? So depending on what part of the military you go into, it depends on how challenging it'll be, right? Like, I mean, we need all sorts, like you need cooks, you need drivers, you need clerks, and then you also need people to actually go out and do the fighting. So you can kind of choose your path, and I chose a path that was more oriented towards fighting. So I ended up going to a bunch of challenging schools like airborne and air assault. Airborne's like you jump out of planes with a parachute. Air assault is kind of you ride into a battle on a helicopter. And then I went to something called Ranger School, which is like a 2-month course where they food and sleep deprive you. And you lose about, most people, they say lose about 20 pounds over the 2 months.
Wow.
And you're just like a miserable human being for 2 months. So that was, again, I in my mind, I had built it up that it was going to be so hard. It was actually slightly easier than expected. But at the same time, other aspects were harder. Like I had trouble passing some of the phases because you have to like pass these subjective grading patrols where you pretend you're in combat and like someone evaluates you.
Definitely doesn't sound easy to me at all. But I suppose this is kind of a little bit of a side point, but I'm just curious to know. I'm always curious about this with people that are in the military. Do you ever feel fear, I suppose, when you're going into armed combat? Is it ever scary?
Yeah, so I'd say the biggest fear is the fear of the unknown. So going into a new situation is always scary, right? And I'm sure you've experienced that, whether it's first day on a new job or first day at school.
Yeah.
So the Army and combat is very similar. So my first deployment, it was very scary going into, right? Because I had no idea what it looked like. And I did my first deployment to Iraq in the cities of Baghdad and Samarra, Iraq, in about 2005. So yeah, that was very scary, nerve-wracking. But you just kind of take it as it comes, and once you get there, again, your mind kind of builds it up to be worse than it is. And honestly, most days in Iraq are actually pretty boring, right? Like nothing happens on most days. So it's like really boring, and then there's like huge periods of excitement, and then it goes back to boring. And then my second and third deployments to Iraq, because I had been there already, I kind of had a baseline. So I kind of knew what I was getting into. Obviously, it's a different city, so the threat level may be different. But I had that baseline to kind of mentally prepare myself for. And then my subsequent deployments after that were all to Middle Eastern countries that are like the Army technically considers combat zones. I'm using air quotes here, but they're not. I wouldn't consider them dangerous, right? Like Lebanon, Qatar, Kuwait. So we get combat entitlements, but they're pretty safe. I was driving around sometimes by myself or sometimes with one other person.
Yeah, wow. It's so interesting to hear from your perspective because I feel like there's so many preconceived ideas about those situations. So, yeah, it's definitely interesting to hear what it's like from the inside. And I suppose the next question is how you discovered obstacle course racing. Uh, was it from military training that you kind of found an interest in that, or how did you stumble across that?
Yeah. So like I mentioned in my bio or at the beginning, I was never really good at anything, and I was regarding sports, so I'd bounce around a lot. So you know, I'd focus on marathon running for a couple months, and then I'd be like, all right, that was fun. I did well in marathon for me personally, like a personal record. And then I'd be like, let's try doing more weight oriented stuff. So I do like bodybuilding, and I got into that, and I did some natural bodybuilding, like with the whole bulk and the cut, and then you like show up on stage in your little like underwear type thing, and you're all painted, so the lights don't wash you out. It's a very weird sport.
Yeah.
And so I did that for a couple months, and then I would switch back to marathon running or do triathlons, and it kind of built this like really well-rounded base. And I had out of sports, and basically learn that practice is the key, right? To get better at anything, you just kind of practice, practice, practice. You practice not until you can do it right, but until you can't do it wrong. And you fast forward a little bit after I'd been in the military for a while, and I was working at a 5th Special Forces group in Tennessee, and they had set up this program where they did a exchange program with Under Armour, the sports apparel brand.
Okay.
And I went and worked at Under Armour for 3 weeks. It was like the most insane experience ever. I was treated way better than I should have been. And at the time, they were sponsoring an event called World's Toughest Mudders, a 24-hour obstacle course race. And with a 24-hour obstacle course race, essentially it's a 5-mile loop, and there's about 20 to 25 obstacles. And they say go, and people run in circles this 5-mile loop doing these obstacles for 24 hours. Most people don't sleep, and you kind of eat on the move, and it's kind of an expensive entry fee. And because I had worked at Under Armour and because they were sponsoring Tough Mudder, I actually ended up getting into that for free. And I did really well at it. And I couldn't believe how well I did. I ended up finishing 13th at my first one in 2014.
Wow.
And at that point, I was like, why am I doing marathon running and all this other stuff where I'm just getting destroyed by the field? And I go to this event and I finished really well. Like, this is where it's at. And that kind of shifted. I basically dropped all my other fitness stuff and I started focusing completely on obstacle course racing.
That's a really cool story. And yeah, I mean, it's so funny when you say kind of so casually, oh, I just did marathon running or just a triathlon. Like that's really intense stuff. So you must be quite the athlete. Well, you are, given your list of achievements in the sport so far. So you then went professional with Conquer the Gauntlet, I believe. Correct me if any of this is wrong. So can you tell me how that went about, and I suppose the process in establishing your career as a professional athlete in this sport?
Yeah. So before we jump into that real quick, you mentioned it's a slippery slope. So you start off doing like 5Ks and 10Ks, and then over time you just kind of keep pushing the limit. So, when I ran my first 10-mile race back in 2002, 2002, I thought it was like the biggest deal in the world. I was like, who runs 10 miles? No one. I'm insane. And then I ran my first marathon a year later, and over time it just keeps building on itself to where it becomes, not a big deal anymore, right? Like I ran 11 miles yesterday, and I didn't post about it on social media because it happens multiple times a week. It's just not a big deal anymore. Yeah. Anyway, I starting around 2015, after my first World's Toughest, which was 2014, I was like, well, I'm pretty good at this. I should do this all the time. So started racing more. And at the time I was trying to write a book on strength training and endurance training, right? So weightlifting and running. And no publishers really wanted to write that because it's very unique and not that many people do it. So I was like, well, what if I change the book focus to obstacle course racing? And a publishing company was like, yeah, we'll publish that. And I was like, cool. I was like, all right, well, now I need to I need to really figure out what I'm doing. So I started like over analyzing everything, and I started going to a lot of different race brands and really looking at the techniques people were using to get across obstacles and save a couple of seconds here and there so I could write about it. And it really led me to study the sport and kind of improve myself. And then from doing all those other sports, again, the secret was practice. So I just started practicing a lot. And because of my running background and triathlon background, I had the endurance and cardiovascular ability. And because of the bodybuilding, powerlifting background, I had the strength. So all I had to do was kind of build that neurological connection to get better at the actual obstacles like monkey bars and platinum rig and all these things where you're swinging from your hands. And I found a local series in the Midwest. They held about 6 events at the time every year. And I was really good at them. And the following year, they were starting a pro team. So they asked me to join. I joined up. And a lot of it's been kind of like feeling my way around. You know, I looked, because I had been involved in all these other sports, I looked at what other people had done in those to be successful and just transferred it over to obstacle course racing. So, you know, I used to read a lot of Runner's World and Flex Magazine and bodybuilding.com. And there's all these people writing articles. And I was like, well, I can write articles. So I started writing articles for obstacle course racing. And like, I've never really, most of the benefits I get are not like it's a huge, oh, here's a salary and this is how much you get paid and blah, blah, blah. I've been kind of nickel and diming my way to success, where I end up not having to pay for, you know, racing or training gear or supplements, right? So it's really been a lot of little things that added up over time that have really reduced my cost for racing and then eventually eliminated it.
Yeah, it's really cool to hear how much you contribute to the sport as well in terms of research or just sharing your experiences, because I do think it's a really niche sport. I hadn't really come across it until I found you. So the other side of it as well, and you touched on it there, for me sitting here thinking about doing a really high intensity race for 8 to 24 hours nonstop is terrifying, you know, like I don't think I would make it out alive. So from that aspect, I suppose, what do you think it is that you did, or how did you get your mind maybe to get to that place where you knew you could endure for that long? And how do you push through in those moments during the race, even when you're really like, oh my God, I have to stop?
You know, like I mentioned earlier, it's a slow buildup, right? So I ran my first marathon in 2003, and then I did my first Ironman distance triathlon in 2004. I also did my first ultra marathon then, and then I did 2004 to 2014, basically 10 years where I was doing the occasional marathon or the occasional ultra marathon. So I had built up this endurance experience, and then in 2014 was my first 24-hour obstacle course race. So I had all these little stepping stones and all these personal experiences that allow me to dig into a well of bad experiences, essentially, right? So
Yeah.
if there's a bad moment in an obstacle course race, I can be like, well, it's not as hot as, and then I insert a memory from the past, right? Like, it's not as hot as the time my air conditioning broke in Iraq and I was sweating like all day on patrol. It's not as hot. I'm not as tired as Ranger School when I was so sleep deprived. I'm not as physically exhausted as I was in Special Forces selection when they were making us carry this, you know, several 100-pound thing through sand several miles. So I have all these experiences to draw on, and that's kind of what I apply to my obstacle course racing. With the military, especially in combat, right? There's no quit button. You can't like DNF a mission, did not finish, and come back and try it again tomorrow, right? So whatever the situation kind of presents you with, you have to deal with at the time. And I've taken a lot of that mindset, which was taught from the military, and applied it to racing, where it's like, well, if I'm having a bad day, you know, quitting's it's just not an option. I have 3 options. I can speed up, I can slow down, or I can maintain the same pace. And that's kind of what I look at in every race. You know, speed up, slow down, maintain the same pace. Those are your choices. And that's what you're going to have to deal with. And with the 8, 12, and 24-hour races, there's, you know, I run on the competitive side of the field, right? So I'm trying to get on the podium or trying to win typically. What's interesting is there's a huge crowd of people, right? So the world's toughest mudder, the kind of like the championship for ultra endurance, they have sometimes 1,600 people there. I mean, it's just this huge crowd. And there are people who go and they run for they do a couple laps and then call it a day. There are people who run a lap, go and eat and sit in their pit and relax for a while and then go back out and run a lap. So you'll get all shapes and sizes and all athletic abilities out there, which it surprises me every year. But it's a very welcoming sport. And, you know, especially with World's Toughest Mudder, there's a lot of camaraderie on the course, right? Because it's really, at the end of the day, it's you versus the course. And, you know, there's a lot of respect for anyone that stays on the course the whole time and really pushes themselves to their new personal limits.
Yeah, it's crazy listening to you explain all that. I think it's just amazing what you can do and where you can take your mind to get past all of these barriers. And do you think that without the military experience that you had, you would have still ended up in some kind of athletic, sport that you would be doing? Do you think without that military experience, you would have been interested at all in that, or what's your opinion on that?
For me personally, no, I don't think so. Because I ended up starting endurance sports to prepare for military schools. Because my logic was, you know, if I can run a marathon or I can run an Ironman, which was the hardest race I knew of in existence at the time, then I should be able to pass all the military schools like Ranger School and Special Forces selection. So that's kind of what ended up leading me down the rabbit hole. And then eventually it turned to the point where, you know, the whole point of racing was to prepare for the military. And then racing became so important to me and took over that, like, now that's what I focus a lot more on. And my military career is kind of in the ending phase because I've been in the Army for 16 years. So I've got about 3.5 left.
Yeah, I was just about to ask if you would ever leave the military for racing.
So yes and no. So in the Army, U.S. Army, you can retire after 20 years. So like I said, I'm about 3.5 years out from retirement, which I will. I'll eventually make there and retire. And then you have a lifetime pension, which is a nice perk. Yeah. And then I can go find a new job, whether it be full-time racing or full-time, something in the racing industry or something completely different. And, with racing, like I said, I kind of nickel and dime my way to success. So, I write articles and I get some money and perks from that. I win prize money. I get some money and perks from that. And then I sell some obstacle course racing related apparel and gear off of my website. So I make some money from that. So it's a lot of small things that have built up to overall success.
And does it ever get difficult to balance the two? Because I would imagine that you're kind of racing when you're on leave from the military. I don't really know how that works, but how do you balance it all with your work in the military being, I can imagine, quite intense, and then I suppose on your days off you're then doing this mad racing and everything? Does it ever just get really tiring?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a busy person, so I'm also married and I have 2 kids. So I have a very understanding wife who gives me a lot of freedom and responsibility, or freedom and leeway to do a lot of this stuff. So she's a saint. She's awesome. With the military, so when I really started getting into racing, it was 2014. So it's kind of in the second half of my second to third quarter. Well, it's in like the third quarter of my career. So my my first part of my career, I was deploying a lot. So I actually added it up once, and I did not sleep in my bed for the first 10 years of my military career. I didn't sleep in my bed 50% of the time. So whether that was on a training school or a deployment, I just wasn't around very much. Now that I've kind of transitioned to the later part of my career, I've purposely chosen jobs that allow me to stay home or in the United States more. So my schedule's a little bit more regular, which opens up the door to let me do a little more racing. And basically it's on the weekends, all the races are on the weekends. So that's when I go do stuff. When I do something during the week that's obstacle course racing related, then I obviously have to take vacation time. I have to take time off. The last thing I'll say, it's a balance, and it's all about prioritizing what you want to do, right? So I make sure if I want to train twice a day, I make sure that when I get up in the morning, one of the first things I do is train, and then hopefully I can squeeze the second one in later in the day. You cut out things that are not adding to your overall goal, right? So like I don't watch much TV. I don't watch many movies. I'm usually working out, spending time with my family, and I don't go out drinking anymore. I don't hang out with friends too much anymore. A lot of that has to do with the military and kind of moving around. So just prioritize what I want to do that's important in my life, and kind of knock tasks out one at a time.
Yeah, I'd say it definitely requires a lot of good time management as well, which I know I could work on. So I suppose, I mean, you've done incredible things within the sport over the last couple of years. So if you had to pick a highlight of your professional OCR career so far, what would be the highlight for you?
So again, when I looked at other sports, I looked at what some of the other athletes were doing, and I applied some of that to obstacle course racing. So there's a lot of athletes in like running and triathlon that do these like multi-day endurance challenges, and they raise money for charity. And I just thought that was really cool because racing and training is inherently selfish, right? Like I'm not spending time with my family. I'm spending time running around the roads or the trails or at the gym, and I really like that about those other athletes and those other sports. So that's what I started doing for obstacle course racing. So kind of my hook here is that I do ultra OCR, but I take things to a new level and I do outside the box challenges, right? So I'll create my own event every year, and I see how far I can go or for how long I can go, and we use that to raise money for a charity called Folds of Honor. They do scholarship money for children whose parents were killed or wounded in action. So I have a personal connection there from friends I've lost in combat.
Yeah.
And so every year I do something different. So, I'd say they're all hard for different reasons, but my personal favorite was in 2020. I did 8 days, 8 obstacle course race marathons in 8 different venues in the winter. So we were
Oh
like
God.
schlepping through snow. And I mean, I was out in the cold, 6 to 11 hours a day, and then we'd get in the car and we'd drive all night sometimes. And my friend Bobby Ross turned it into like a video series. So there's like 8 3-minute videos that you can find on my website that I think they just came out really good. And the long-term plan is to turn it into like a full-length documentary sometime in the next year. The other big ones are, I did a 24-hour treadmill run where I run a mile on a treadmill, get off and do 4 obstacles. I did a 48-hour multi-lap of Conquer the Gauntlet, one of the races in the Midwest in the summer. I've done, I tried to do every 24-hour OCR in the world one year, and I ended up doing 6 of them in a 365-day span, and I did pretty well at all of them. I podiumed at every one in the U.S., all 4 of them. And yeah, a lot of that is covered in I have a biography called Ultra OCR Man that's on Amazon that people want to learn more and see more like the end of the inside scoop, they can pick that up.
Yeah, definitely. All of the links to everything will be in the show notes at the end so people can check out more because it's incredible what you've done. And when you read through like the list of things you've achieved, it's a long list. You've been a very busy man. um and so I suppose if you had to come up with, or maybe you already know what it is for you, a secret to success, one, thing or one key ingredient that you've noticed throughout, your life experience and your training that makes people successful, what do you think it is?
I'd say the secret to success is the appearance of success is often people that just didn't give up. Right. So you look at my website and you see all these like great race results and these great finishes and these books and these, these ultra OCR accomplishments, but really it's just persistence over time. And it's persistence to the point where it seems stupid, right? Like it seems like nonsense. It's like, you're not going anywhere. What are you doing? And then years of building on that persistence. And then you finally like break through and you start achieving success and stuff. So a lot of it's, like I mentioned, a lot of it's just practice and persistence. And, I try to do things on my website and try to sell things and start things all the time that fail, right? It's like, I mean, the list of failures is long. It's just the failures typically get pushed aside and we don't talk about them much anymore. So all you end up seeing is the success side, but there's a lot of failure there. You're just, you're not seeing it, or it happened before I really started kind of pushing myself into the spotlight.
Yeah, I like that point about persistence because I feel like, I don't know, just the way everything's so instant now and all this kind of thing, it always appears that people are overnight successes. You stumble
Right.
across them and you're like, oh wow, this happened so fast for them. But as you just demonstrated, you never see the years and years of build up before. So I think it's really interesting that you brought that point up.
And the one other thing I'll add to that is, take responsibility for your actions, right? So again, part of the military training is, whatever happens to you, it's your own fault. So I kind of take that kind of extreme ownership to myself and be like, all right, well, if I failed, it's my own fault. So what can I do to fix that? And I'm not trying to place blame on myself and be like mull on things that went wrong, but like I can't get better if I don't try to take an honest look at myself and figure out what am I doing wrong, or how can I fix that, and how can I improve in the future.
Yeah, that's so true. I think that's such a skill to be able to recognize as well, where you've gone wrong, instead of just that blame culture of just it's always someone else's fault, never your own.
Yeah.
And then my last question for you today, and I'm going to let you get on with your morning. If I put your 10-year-old self in front of you today, having been through everything you've been through in life with your professional sports career and your military training, what's the biggest piece of advice you would give that 10-year-old self moving forward?
Whew, that's a good question. That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I'd say trust your instincts and you'll find your way. I've been really happy how my career and personal life and professional life have gone. Could there be better things? There always could be better things. And honestly, I don't know what opportunities I missed because I missed them. So to my 10-year-old self, I'd probably just say, trust your instincts, and you'll find something you're passionate about and you'll excel at it. And don't worry too much, but stay persistent and keep working, and you'll find happiness.
Yeah, I love that. I think those are really good pieces of advice. And yeah, I've really enjoyed chatting with you this morning, hearing more about your story. It's very inspirational, and it's making me want to go for a run or just do something with myself now. So thank you so much for giving up your time to share that with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, awesome. Start running. It's a slippery slope though, so I'll warn you. You might be running marathons in like 2 years.
Oh, that would be amazing if I was. Thank you so much for listening, and as always, please rate, share, and leave a comment if you like what you hear. And don't forget to follow @WhatIt'sLikePod on Instagram and Facebook. To find out more about Evan and his career thus far, visit the links provided in the show notes. I'll be back on Thursday with more inspiring stories, but for now, this has been What It's Like with Luce.